So I have to say that when I first heard there was going to be a Game of Thrones prequel series, I was not excited. I came to Game of Thrones late, but I did catch up to kind of where the different plot lines were. But those last couple of seasons were pretty bad. The most egregious thing to me, though, was when, spoiler alert, for Game of Thrones. So if you don't want to spoil it, just go ahead and click off now. So basically, when Jon Snow killed Daenerys, and basically the Dothraki, her guards, like all those people, just let them live. That won't happen in the first season. You don't murder the queen and then get to kind of just go and get in solitary confinement. They would have cut your throat out. They would have cut you, remove parts of your body that you valued. Daemon Targaryen would have really handled Jon Snow, and he didn't care about family or whatever. Cousins or whatever. You gone. So yeah, no, and there's a lot of stuff before that, a lot of issues with the final couple of seasons. That was, and also who ultimately became king and how that worked out. But once I actually saw the show, I was definitely pleasantly surprised. Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jason Freeman, and I'd like to welcome you all to my channel. In this video, I review the first season of the House of the Dragon series on HBO Max. I'm going to tell you what I liked about the series, I'm going to tell you what I didn't like about the series, then I'm going to tell you what I think you should see the series or just skip it. Now, at any point, feel free to click the notification bell or subscribe to my channel to get more content. So, without further ado, let's begin. Season of House of the Dragon deals with the ascent of Viserys Targaryen to the Iron Throne in Westeros and the subsequent ascent of his daughter Rhaenyra. Along the way, there are various intrigues in regards to kind of who has the rightful claim to the throne. So first, there's a conflict at the very beginning of the series between Rhaenys and Viserys as to who is in line to the Iron Throne at the time of their grandfather's death. Then there's also the question of, if there's a male heir, should Rhaenyra, who is the proclaimed heir of Viserys, have a claim to the Iron Throne, and other kind of intrigues as well. But basically, there's a lot of conflicts. It's very much of a Game of Thrones. We have different players in the royal family as well as in the kind of subsequent or the kind of exterior of the periphery of the royal family, who all are trying to jostle for power within Westeros. So what I like about the show? Well, the first thing I loved about the show are the compelling characters. So Daemon Targaryen, to me, is the most compelling character of them all. He is a very, violent person. I've heard him called psychotic, though I think he's very much more calculated. He's very much of a badass too, in that in battle you don't want to face Daemon. So yeah, very much skilled swordsman. And so yeah, definitely Daemon would be probably the most compelling character. He's unpredictable. That's the other thing. So with all the characters, you start to get little beats as to how they react to certain situations. And Daemon's always a wild card, which is why he was called the Rogue Prince. You also have Rhaenyra. So the thing about Rhaenyra is she's a very complicated character. She definitely has morals. She has a moral compass, but at the same time, she also has desires. And so that leads to various conflicts in relation to, and I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but in relation to things within the family and calling some of her desires and acting on her desires, causing conflicts with various members of her family and some other families connected to the royal family. Another very complicated character is Alicent. Now, I'll be honest with you, from the very beginning, I like Alicent. Alicent is a very, intelligent, strong-willed young woman. Though even with that strong will, she does have a soft spot / blind spot for her father, Otto Hightower. And so she's very much being manipulated by him. Now, at various points, she does push back, but in many ways his influence is pretty tough, or pretty, hard to kind of push back against. And so in many ways, he has a lot of influence on her and her decisions. That being said, I do like Alicent. And so from what I've heard is in the book, she's much more of an evil character and not likable. Or basically the way that she's described, because in the book, she's actually described historically, I think, by maesters about as the different kind of, almost like with historical documents, different takes on what actually happened during the Dance of the Dragons. But the point is, the character as presented in the screen to me is someone who I do like, as opposed to her children, who I'm not a fan of. But very much Alicent is one of those compelling, complicated characters. Though in many ways, I think she's less complicated than Rhaenyra, because I think Rhaenyra definitely has, again, this proclivity that's going to always get her in trouble, very similar to Daemon. But with Alicent, I think it's more so just that she does have a very clear moral pathway. It's just that her father has influence on her, and as he makes arguments sometimes that she finds compelling, it leads her to kind of follow his pathway, and very much he's all about power, though on some level he does care about the realm, though I think a lot of it does come down to power. And lastly, in regards to compelling characters, I have to put Viserys Targaryen in there as well. So the thing about Viserys is that he's very, how do I say, he's got some nobility to him, being that he's a king, noble king, a peaceful king as well. The issue with him, though, is he's very naive. So while narratively he very much bothers me and annoys me at various points with his naivete, at the same time, I get his motivation. And so in regards to any good characters, it's not that they just make you love them or like them. If they make you hate them, they're also, I think that's also important as well. And if they can make you both love and hate them, as, say, Daemon and Viserys both do for me, that makes them extremely compelling characters, which I think characters are, in many ways, one of the strongest suits of this show. Another thing I liked about the show was the action sequences when they did happen. Now, I will mention one of my critiques will be the lack of action at various points, but when it did happen, they were amazing. I think even sometimes, though, when you don't have as many, it makes it more valuable, though I think there should have been a little bit more, but again, I'll talk more about that with my critiques. But in regards to action, when they did happen, like the Battle of the Stepstones, something that happened in the final episode, which I'm not going to say what it was. I want you to definitely, if you haven't seen it, watch all the way through to that last episode. Something that happens in the last episode is one of the most stressful, like, thrilling scenes of television that I've seen ever. For me. I mean, and it's one of those things, there's definitely like horror things that are more suspenseful, but for this one, for a show like this, it was extremely stressful to watch, which made it really compelling. So the action sequences, when they do happen, are amazing, and I really do like them. Though, again, they were few and far between, which I'll talk about with my critiques. And the last thing that I did really like about the show, and I liked a lot about the show, but the last thing I liked about the show is something that I also liked about Game of Thrones. They were not afraid to push the envelope when it comes to all sorts of subject matter, whether it be violent, whether it be sexual. They definitely pushed the envelope. It was something that, there were definitely cringeworthy moments. There were definitely those moments it's like, oh my God, what just happened? Which made the show and the experience of watching the show even more thrilling. And so definitely they're not afraid to kind of push the envelope. And I will say, and as someone who has, I have a kid, so as someone who has been involved in a birth, I was, there with my wife during the birth and saw the whole thing. This show will make you very, let's say, stressed or squeamish when it comes to births, especially when you think about that. I know this isn't the past. This is a fantasy show, but it's loosely based on the Middle Ages for the most part, and so it makes you think about birth during that time and some of the things like with complications, and just makes you squeamish. So definitely births were very fraught in this show, which I think made the show even better and more compelling. There were definitely moments when I was watching the screen. I was like, I want to look away, but I can't. I should look away. This is really traumatizing. So, but yeah, no, it was they were not afraid to push the envelope, and again with the sexual stuff too. Though they were definitely in Game of Thrones, I think they pushed it more, though again, it's just the first season. And they do have the brothels, which they had in both Game of Thrones and this. So that's there. But they definitely pushed the envelope with the violence. Also, no spoilers, weddings, man. those weddings. The red wedding, but in Joffrey's wedding, or what, I think the was it purple wedding or whatever. But they have a wedding in this one that's like, man, gotta avoid those Westeros weddings, man. Now, what didn't I like? So, kind of going back to something I mentioned before is, while there were some pretty compelling action sequences, the action was few and far between. Now, I'm pretty sure that as the seasons go forward with the Dance of the Dragons, the war, or the civil war within the Targaryen household, that there will be more action on an episode-to-episode basis. Though I know with the dragons, for example, they're pretty expensive. So even that they might not be as much as we would expect based on the narrative, based on the story. But that was one of my things, is there were a lot of episodes that I'm not going to say were boring, because there was always something happening, but it was very much, I'm watching this late at night, after my son's gone to bed, and it comes on like 9 and whatever, and I stream it, so oftentimes I watch it a little bit later. There were definitely times when I was kind of tired, but I was kind of like, I want something else to happen, like, and they did oblige sometimes. I think about the Battle of the Stepstones episode. So that one was actually a pretty slow episode up until they got to, the War of the Stepstones got to the part with the crab feeder and Daemon and all that stuff. And again, I don't want to give spoilers, but that was pretty compelling battle in that episode. But yeah, there were definitely, a lot of those like slow episodes, and then something happened. I just wish there was a little bit more action. That's all. And I'm hoping to get a lot more of that as we kind of progress through the Dance of the Dragons war. Another thing that I have a critique, or another critique I have of the series, is that it felt claustrophobic at various points. We spent a lot of time at the Red Keep, which, again, after a while, it gets kind of old. And I understand that we're introducing characters, especially this royal family, the Targaryens. Also, you got the Valerians at Driftmark and all these different characters who are related and connected to the royal family. And so a lot of it is just very limited. Also, again, with cost, I know they don't want to, spend a bunch of money going to every single place on the map. And so as the series progresses, I definitely want to see more of this world at this time. So this is 200 years before Game of Thrones. So I want to see Dorne. I want to see Essos. I want to see just the various points. I want to see the North. The North wasn't really seen in this series. I just want to see more of that. And again, I'm pretty sure it's coming. I know it's coming because the war takes place in different places. But so far it's mainly like Red Keep, Dragonstone, and then the Stepstones. The Stepstones. And so again, it's just one of those things. It felt claustrophobic in that we spent a lot of time at the Red Keep, a lot of time indoors. And definitely anytime we get away out and away, especially like with dragons going off somewhere, that's definitely a breath of fresh air. I just wish there was more of it, because this series did feel a bit claustrophobic at times. And the last thing I want to mention that was a critique were some of the narrative choices that were made. Again, I'm not going to go into any detail about any specific ones, but the ones that people tend to kind of have critiqued, in particular one related to Rhaenys and her dragon, I definitely disagree with at the time as well. That particular one just didn't feel, it didn't feel like it was within the logic of the show realistic, in that based on the motivations, based on how people act, if there's a situation where you can act in a way that would prevent death, while also at the same time you cause death in that scene, it just doesn't make sense that you wouldn't pull the trigger. Now, obviously, within the framework of the show, that, again, I'm not going to go into more detail, but that particular thing couldn't happen. But at the same time, maybe just don't have that scene. Maybe have the scene in a different way that doesn't include something that's so contradictory. And I'll stop there because I don't want to give anything away. But actually, before I move on to see it or skip it, I do want to make one comment, though. One of my big issues with some of the critiques of the show is that they become very ad hominem and don't really get at the actual content. So when these shows are written, it's oftentimes not one person making the decision about a narrative thing. And so the pick and the point at one person, to me, isn't very intelligent. The idea is that, in order for something to get on the screen, it's not that one person, unless that person is like the showrunner person who's given final say on everything, which I'm not sure. Even in that situation, it's still a studio or whatever. But the point is, there's not one writer, especially a junior writer, someone who's not the main writer, who's going to be, well, put this in there, and if you people don't agree with it, I don't care, I'm just going to put it in there. It's typically other other people who are working on the scripts as well. So again, the idea that you're targeting one person, this one person is responsible for all this, is nonsense. If you can get mad at one writer, get mad at all of them because they're all part of the process. And oftentimes, and I'll say it, I'm a sociologist, by the way, just if you haven't noticed it. Oftentimes, women get the brunt of that. So if a woman writer does something, she'll get attacked, even if it's something a male writer also agrees with, also is in line with, because misogyny. So again, that's one of my big critiques. Now, I do, again, there were aspects of this show and the writing that I didn't agree with, but I'm not going to point at one person and say, well, they're the responsible person. They're producers. It's a big process to make this show. It's not one person that makes a decision on what goes into an episode. Come on, people. It's to me, it's like a lot of lazy thinking and a lot of, we're going to, I don't like this, so I'm going to blame the scapegoat over here, whether it be a minority or a woman or whatever, just because I don't like it and I don't want to blame the people that look like me who might be making these decisions. So should you see it or skip it? Well, here's the thing about this show. Not only is it a see it, it's a must see. This is why I say it's a must see. There's certain shows that kind of push the envelope on television. So Breaking Bad is one of those shows. You have this protagonist guy, this regular protagonist who becomes a villain. We don't see that a lot. Oftentimes, at the very beginning of the narrative, you have the good guys, you have the bad guys, and even like old westerns, you have a good guy who's wearing white or light colors, and you have the bad guys wearing black, and it's pretty set up, pretty clear. Even my favorite western, Unforgiven, even though the Clint Eastwood character is a bad man, or he's a guy who's done stuff in the past, it's very clear that you're rooting for him, and Gene Hackman you don't want to root for. Racist, evil, MF, or whatever. And so the idea is that oftentimes with like shows, it's pretty clear cut who's the good guy and bad guy. And Breaking Bad subverted that idea. So where, again, I think the way it was, Mr. Chips becomes Scarface or something like that. Same thing with Game of Thrones. So we're so used to the fantasy, happily ever after, magic and all that stuff. And this is a very gritty world in which you have the hero, one of the heroes, Eddard Stark, get his head cut off. Spoiler alert. And so and so these shows kind of push the envelope. So House of Dragon does a similar thing in that you have these characters who all are in different places. And it's very easy to hate one and love another one. But every episode is something different. For example, you start with Viserys. He does something pretty horrific to his wife, essentially. Though we get the reasoning why, but at the same time, in the current period, you wouldn't do that. Or you couldn't do that based on, legalities, at least in the U.S. But the point is, he does this horrible thing to his wife, but then the rest of the show, he's constantly doing good things or things that preserve the peace. Rhaenyra is this very moral person, is the good guy, our hero. But then she does things that get people killed even when they're correct in their assessment of the situation. And you'll know what I'm talking about when you see this series. So she's complicated. Daemon Targaryen, to me, my favorite character, is the most complicated of them all. He has nobility to him. He does the right thing in various points, or does a good thing in various points. But at the same time, he has this underlying darkness that motivates his behaviors to do horrific things sometimes, even to people who he is very close to. So all these characters are very complicated. So I definitely think it's a show that is worth watching. And very much I would encourage people to watch the show. So not only, again, is it a see it, but it's also a must see. Now, at the same time, again, this is a very gory show at various aspects. Again, I mentioned the wedding. I mentioned there's various battles and things that happen. Even in the last episode, something pretty gory happens. And so if you're not in the gore, if you're not in the blood, if you're not in the, and again, I'll say this, if there's something related to birth trauma, don't watch this. Birth trauma and things like miscarriage and things like that. So there's a lot of that stuff in this show, a lot more than I expected, though you don't really expect that in the show. And so as someone who is connected and understands birth trauma, things like that, is something that could be very triggering for you. So if birth trauma is something that, again, is part of your biography, you might not want to watch this series, or you might want to skip those parts. And then there is that in there. But overall, again, I think this is an amazing show. It's my favorite show currently. other than maybe like Atlanta, but this is way better than Atlanta in my opinion. So yeah, this is an amazing show, and I definitely recommend you all check it out at some point. Now, if you found this review helpful, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, please share this video with anyone who might be interested in watching the show at some point or might be interested in my review. Thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.